And I direct the Jackson Family Center for Ethics and Values, which is sponsoring this talk today. So I'll just go ahead and say I'm very grateful to have some of the founders of the Jackson Center, the Jackson sisters who are with us today. So I'll just welcome Miss Laura and Miss Jeannie, who's here today, and we're very grateful if y'all stand up. Thank you so much for everything you've done. So the center is named after their families. So we call them, there's 5 sisters, and we do call them the Jackson 5. So we're very grateful for their support for the Jackson Center over the last 20 years. So we're really excited for our talk today. If you've never been to a Jackson Center event before, let me tell you a little bit about the format. We have a speaker who's going to give a presentation, and at the end we'll have time for questions from the audience. That's usually about 15 minutes. We usually give priority to students who ask questions first before professors. But of course, if there's a big silent audience and nobody has anything to say, I will call on a professor. So with that, let me tell you about our speaker today. I am very excited to welcome my colleague in the philosophy department, Dr. Emily McGill. She's been my colleague since the fall of 2020, and she had the unfortunate event of joining my department while we were in the middle of the pandemic. Despite that, and despite the fact that I didn't get to see her except for over Zoom for about the first 9 months, she is a very popular teacher, an amazing colleague, and a very wonderful person to have in our department. She loves dogs, she likes playing trivia, and she even might allow my colleagues' children to show off their fancy moves on the dance floor of her wedding, where she should have been the main topic, but my kids took over. We're very excited that she joined us, and she has many research interests which complement our department well. She has interest in political philosophy, ethics, focus on relational autonomy, feminism, and political liberalism. She's even published an article on Stoicism. She has a very wide range of interests. So if you want to know her credentials, she has her PhD from Vanderbilt University and taught at Keene State University in New Hampshire before moving here to Coastal. So help me join me today in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Emily McGill.
How many of you have heard of gaslighting before? That might be everybody. I think that's everybody. Okay, that is no accident. So gaslighting has recently exploded in popularity. It is everywhere. It's actually so popular that the dictionary named it the word of the year in 2022. What an honor. And we're going to look at some definitions of gaslighting in a minute, but for now, let's think of it as something that happens when somebody tries to get you to doubt yourself at a really deep or really fundamental level. Now, gaslighting started as a term to refer to a sort of coercive manipulation that can happen in intimate partner relationships as a mechanism of abuse and control. So now if you look at like domestic violence resources, they will provide resources to people about gaslighting as a sort of control or abuse that can happen in these relationships. And I have an example of that. So this is from the movie The Girl on the Train. Has anyone seen this movie? Okay, you should all see this movie. It stars Emily Blunt, and she apparently sometimes drinks a little bit too much. Her husband convinces her that she blacks out, and while she is blacked out, that she does all of these terrible, terrible things. Now, she has no memory of doing these things, but her husband is so convincing and so angry with her for doing these awful things that she finally just ends up agreeing with him apologizing for these things that she can't remember. And I'm not going to give any spoilers, but on my reading of this movie, the entire movie is about gaslighting as a mechanism of spousal abuse. So this is like a good example of what we classically meant by the term gaslighting. But as it became more popular, we started to use the word in lots of other ways. So these are a few, oh, the little thing is messed up. My image is messed up. All right, hopefully that doesn't keep happening. We'll roll with it. These are a few recent headlines that I found when I was Googling gaslighting. Apparently, South Park is gaslighting Hollywood. The dictionary is gaslighting us. That's the word that's dictionary gaslighting. That's a thing. And then you know the little AI Google guy that pops up at the top of your Google search? That guy convinced me that the music industry is gaslighting us into liking Taylor Swift, and that's why she's so popular. Some of you are nodding like, yeah, that's the only reason. Yeah, okay. So, but now I'm confused, right? Because we have this word that used to refer to a very specific thing, a mechanism of abuse. And now it's referring to the dictionary. And I start to wonder to myself, like, are we really all talking about the same thing anymore? Or has something gone awry in the way that we talk about this word? Now, one way, beyond the dictionary, that the term has expanded is that now people are talking about self-gaslighting. And in self-gaslighting, what happens is you become your own gaslighter. So you cause yourself to doubt yourself. And some of you are already nodding about this. And I think that's because we can think of certain cases that feel a lot like self-gaslighting. So I don't know if any of you have ever lacked self-confidence or experienced anxiety. Anxiety might just feel like, yeah, the definition of anxiety is just self-gaslighting. Like, that's what anxiety is. It causes you to doubt yourself at a really deep fundamental level. So I think intuitively, this idea of self-gaslighting seems plausible. Okay, but there's still this little part of me that's like, this is so different from what we were originally talking about that I still wonder if we're really talking about the same thing, or if we're pulling a Taylor Swift kind of move and talking about something just radically different. So here's the question I want to ask today. The images continue to be a little screwy. That's all right. Classically, gaslighting is an interpersonal phenomenon. It is something that happens between at least two people. If we want to start talking about self-gaslighting, that's going to change. It's now going to be an intrapersonal phenomenon. There's only going to be one person. That same person will be the gaslighter and the gaslighted. And I want to know, all right, so we might feel like we're self-gaslighting, but is that feeling really best described as a person becoming their own gaslighter? I don't know. I'm a little suspicious of this intrapersonal case. Maybe something else is going on instead, even though it feels like self-gaslighting. And I'm going to say, something else is going on instead, even though it feels like self-gaslighting. I see some of my students, my former students. Hello. You know that I love philosophy. I'm a little bit obsessed. And yeah, I know. One of the things I love about philosophy is that when it's at its best, it can help us make sense of ourselves and make sense of the world that we live in. I truly believe that about philosophy. And then I think of like words and concepts as tools. Those are tools that help us understand ourselves and our world. But some tools are better than others. That is also just true. So, when it comes to thinking about self-gaslighting, today I want to say we actually have better tools to understand experiences that might seem self-gaslighting. And the two better tools that I'm going to talk about today are just regular old gaslighting and a sort of internalized negative social messaging that feminist philosophers call internalized oppression, which we'll talk about in a bit. So I want to say we should use those two concepts instead of the concept of self-gaslighting to understand ourselves and our experiences in cases where we might feel like self-gaslighting type behavior is happening. Why? Because it's not the best tool. We have better tools. All right. So here's the outline of the talk. The first thing I'm going to do is define gaslighting. I don't have a week, so I'm only going to give us definitions according to 2 people, because that's what we have time for. Then I'm going to use those definitions and I'm going to apply them to 2 cases where people feel like they're gaslighting themselves. But in both of those cases, I'm going to say that is not what's happening. The first case, that's the case of Ingrid, that's going to be a case of regular old interpersonal gaslighting. And then the second case that comes to us from someone called Scarlett, that's going to be a case of internalized oppression. That's what I'm going to try to convince us of. And then I'm going to conclude by giving us the why do I care about this? What is the payoff of this talk today? And I'm going to try to give us some reasons why the words we use matter so much and why we should really be concerned to pick the right tools when we're trying to understand things. All right, let's look at some definitions. This one comes to us from Kate Abramson. So she is actually the first philosopher to start talking about gaslighting back in 2014. And I think every paper I have read since then in philosophy about gaslighting has cited her 2014 paper. So I'm like, who's an expert on gaslighting? Kate Abramson is an expert on gaslighting. And this account comes from actually her 2024 book on gaslighting, which is fantastic. What I've done on this slide is summarize the book. Okay, what is gaslighting according to Kate Abramson? It is a form of emotional manipulation where the gaslighter is trying to get their target, that's the person they're gaslighting, into doubting their perceptions of reality so much that their target begins to feel like they are losing their minds or going crazy. And now, I told you that words matter, so I want to say a word about the word crazy. Abramson uses the word crazy very intentionally because people who report being gaslit describe their own experience as feeling like they were going crazy. So to do justice to their experiences, she also uses the word crazy. And I will follow her in using that to do justice to people's self-reports. Because words matter, so I want to explain why I'm using that word. Okay, so that's what the gaslighter is trying to do. Now the gaslighter is trying to do something, which for Abramson means that gaslighting is always intentional. So it's never like, oops, I did a gaslighting. That doesn't happen, according to Abramson. What is the gaslighter trying to do? They are trying to destroy the possibility of disagreement. And what she means by that is the gaslighter is trying to so radically undermine the target that the target feels like they are no longer sane enough or no longer capable enough to disagree with what the gaslighter is trying to get them to believe. And that, I think, is what happens in the movie The Girl on the Train. Emily Blunt's character begins to think she is not sane enough to disagree with what her husband is convincing her of, and so she finally just agrees with what he's saying. All right, Abramson also thinks that gaslighting is a very specific kind of moral wrong that will become important in a few minutes. She calls it a special brand of immorality. So you're doing something wrong when you gaslight, you are harming somebody, and it's bad. And then she also says it tends to be the case that there is a power imbalance between the gaslighter and the target. It's not always the case, but gaslighting will be most successful when the gaslighter holds power over their target. And shout out to Dr. Perez. I don't know if you remember this. Probably not. But he encouraged me to think about power in gaslighting, and that's why it's in my talk today. So I need footnote, Dr. Perez. All right. summarize an entire article on a slide. This comes to us from Cindy Stark in 2019. And here's how she describes gaslighting. It is a type of manipulation. And again, the gaslighter is trying to do something. And for Stark, the gaslighter is trying to do two things. They want their target to doubt the judgments about the world that they currently have, and they want the target to doubt their ability to form judgments in the first place. And again, because the gaslighter is trying to accomplish something, Stark says gaslighting is always intentional. It's not an oopsies, just like for Abramson. It is also, and because it's intentional, right, there's a goal. What is the gaslighter trying to do? They're trying to dismiss the credibility of their target. Basically, they're trying to get the target to feel like they are not a good knower. They're not good at knowing things. Says Stark, that is morally wrong. Don't be doing that, okay? And for Stark, there is always a power differential between the gaslighter and the target of gaslighting. So whereas Abramson says it'll just be more successful if there's this power thing, Stark says if we're talking about gaslighting, there's power involved. And that will become important soon too. Okay, so now what I want to do is combine those two accounts. Why? I want a list. I like a list. I want a list of things that will help us look at cases and be able to determine if these are cases of gaslighting. So basically, I want some definitional criteria to determine what makes something gaslighting. And I think if we combine these two accounts, we get a nice list of 4 things. So I think for both Abramson and Stark, there is an aim of the gaslighter. The gaslighter's aim or goal is something about getting the target to doubt themselves and their perception of reality to such an extent that they question their own sanity. Then there is a method that they use to achieve that goal. That's the method of intentional manipulation. There's a moral assessment of gaslighting, that it is a specific and serious kind of moral wrong. And then there's the power component, which for Abramson doesn't have to be the case. For Stark, does have to be the case. So when I combine them, I say often the case. So it is often the case that the gaslighter will have power over their target. So why do I like this list? Because, well, I should say first that if I were going to ask Abramson and Stark, they would want a number 5. And number 5 would be gaslighting is interpersonal. It always happens between different people. Okay, but I didn't put that on the list because that's what we're trying to question today. We're trying to question whether it has to be interpersonal. So they would say, yeah, but we're questioning that today, so I haven't put it on the list. What I want to say is, all right, let's look at these self-gaslighting cases. If they meet all of these criteria on the board, then the person has become their own gaslighter. They're gaslighting themselves. But if we look at cases and they don't meet those criteria, then what's going on is not actually gaslighting. So my job now is to convince you, I'm going to show you 2 cases that look a lot like self-gaslighting. I'm going to try to convince you that they don't meet any of these 4 criteria, and so they are not people who have become their own gaslighters. They're not self-gaslighting. Let's see if I can convince you. All right, here's case 1. This comes to us from someone called Ingrid. This is a real-world case that Ingrid published in 2021, describing her own experience. And these are her exact words. Okay, the first social worker I spoke to in my childhood said emotional abuse isn't a reportable situation. I learned that the problem wasn't out there, so it must reside in me. I tried attending to my emotional dysregulation, but it was like cutting off the top of a weed. The roots still ran deep. And when the weed popped up again, even stronger, it was evidence. See, I am fundamentally broken. It ran so deep, it was like a ghost that haunted me. says. And then she reports feeling like perhaps she has been gaslighting herself into thinking that her experience of emotional abuse was not real. So she begins to think that she is a self-gaslighter. Now initially, there is a lot about Ingrid's case that looks like gaslighting. So these are some direct quotes from her published narrative. When she says the problem wasn't out there, so it must reside in me, she is identifying herself as the problem in the situation. And as we'll see, that is a standard thing that happens when somebody has been gaslit. They identify the problem as their own. Then, I think that also applies to her appeal to emotional dysregulation and that she is fundamentally broken. Like, those are things, she's identifying herself as having a problem, right? Like, there is something wrong with her. You don't say you're fundamentally broken if you're not feeling like there's something wrong with you, right? So she feels like there's something wrong with her. That is a standard message in gaslighting. I also think that her appeal to emotional dysregulation, that's like an inability to control your emotions properly. I think that is a way to express this feeling like you're losing your mind, you're going crazy, right? Like you have this swarm of emotions and you can't even pinpoint them or control them. I think that's her expressing that she feels like she's losing her mind, which, as we saw, happens in cases of gaslighting. And then we see some really serious self-doubt here in these bottom two quotes. I didn't experience real trauma, she writes. And maybe he, my abuser, didn't actually mean what I thought he meant. Maybe I just misinterpreted his messages and thought they were abusive, but they weren't actually abusive. I made it up. That kind of self-doubt is what gaslighters want their targets to feel. So, Ingrid's case looks a lot like gaslighting, but we're not trying to figure out if Ingrid has been gaslit. We are trying to figure out if she has been gaslit by herself. We're trying to figure out if she is her gaslighter. And in this case, I don't think she is. And here's where I'm going to go back to my list. And I want to say that Ingrid, based largely on her own words, does not meet these 4 criteria that she would have to meet to be her gaslighter. So the first one, we saw that the aim of gaslighters is to get the target to doubt themselves and their perception of reality. But when you read what Ingrid writes, she says things like, I will protect myself, love myself, and trust myself. That's what her goal is. Her goal is to trust herself. That looks like the opposite of the goal of a gaslighter, which is to get you to doubt yourself. She is reporting feeling the opposite. So I think she does not meet the aim component of gaslighting. I also don't think she meets the method component, which is intentional manipulation of the target. She describes her beliefs as fully unintentional. She doesn't want to have these negative beliefs anymore. She says, I don't want to keep saying this to myself. So to me, that looks like she is not repeating these negative messages intentionally. And I certainly don't think she's intentionally manipulating herself. So I went back to Abramson and Stark to see how they understand manipulation. And according to them, you're not manipulating somebody whenever you try to get them to change their minds. Otherwise, I would be manipulating a lot of you right now. And I'm not. I don't. It's not intentional. Okay. Manipulation involves a sort of deception. It involves doing something without the knowledge of the person you're manipulating. You do it behind their back. It's sneaky. That's what's involved in manipulation. I don't see Ingrid sneakily manipulate. Like, I just don't see that happening in her case. So I don't think her beliefs are intentional, and I certainly don't think it's intentional manipulation. So I don't think she meets the method component either. Now we've got the next 2 components. Remember I said that, according to Abramson at least, gaslighting is a special brand of immorality. Now I'm going to ask for some head nods or head shakes. I'm going to gauge some intuitions. How many of us feel like we want to blame Ingrid for having self-doubts about her experience? You just say, no, we don't want to blame her, or yes, we do want to blame her. I'm seeing lots of no's, we don't want to blame her. I think what that tells us is that our intuition is that Ingrid is not doing something morally wrong. But intuitions can be mistaken, as we know. So let's say that Ingrid is doing something morally wrong in having these sorts of self-doubts. I guess it's possible. I don't think she's doing the same kind of wrong thing that gaslighters are doing. There are lots of wrong things in the world, and not all of them are gaslighting. So I don't think she needs this special brand of immorality component of gaslighters. And then finally, I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly because I have to confess to you that I don't actually understand how this power component would work in an intra-personal case. Like we would have to say Ingrid, as her gaslighter, exists in a position of power over Ingrid as the target of her gaslighting. And that borders on incoherent to me. Maybe you can explain it to me, but I truly do not understand how there could be this power differential if someone is gaslighting themselves. And so I'm going to say she doesn't need the power component either. But we still saw all those similarities between Ingrid's case and a case of gaslighting. Right? I had a whole list of similarities. Y'all, I don't think that's an accident. I think Ingrid has been gaslit by other people. Okay? So when we return to her narrative, she says, the source of my negative messaging is people around me. She specifically identifies her social worker and her abuser and calls them out as her gaslighters. She uses the word gaslighter to describe them. She says they planted on purpose roots of doubt in her, and then she adopted those roots of doubt. And if we return, so that, the top part of that is what I initially showed you, her analogy. She follows that up by saying, but here's the fact of the matter. Those roots aren't even mine. They didn't originate in me. These thoughts were deliberately planted and then tended to by her gaslighters. What Ingrid is describing is exactly the way gaslighting will make the target feel when gaslighting has worked, when it's been successful. So I read a bunch of stuff on gaslighting, okay? And gaslighting will make the target feel at least some of these things on this list. So it will make the target feel guilt and an excessive sense of responsibility for what they have gone through, for what happened to them. They will believe that they have done something wrong, or that there is something wrong with them. They will identify the problem as their own problem. They will then blame themselves for the problem. And this last one is super important for Abramson, at least. The target of gaslighting will feel like they have been turned against themselves. In this case, self-gaslighting. Guess how many of those things Ingrid meets? Literally all of them. All of them. She reports feeling guilt and excessive responsibility. In her narrative, she calls herself a selfish liar for telling people that she has been abused. She blames herself. She blames herself and feels guilty for what she has gone through. She believes that she's done something wrong. She believes there's something wrong with her. I am fundamentally broken, she says. She identifies the problem as her own. The problem wasn't out there, so it must reside in me, she says. She then blames herself for that, and she feels like she's been turned against herself. Now, how do I know that she feels like she's been turned against herself? Because to report that you are your own gaslighter just is to say that you feel like you've been turned against yourself. You have been turned against yourself so much that you now identify as your own gaslighter. That is really to feel like you've been turned against yourself. And Abramson talks about this too. She says gaslighting will make us feel that we're complicit in our own undoing and responsible for our own suffering. that is exactly what we see in Ingrid's case. So I don't think Ingrid has been gaslighting herself. I think, unfortunately, she has been the target of extremely successful interpersonal gaslighting. She is not gaslighting herself. Okay, that's case one. This is case two. Admittedly, I made this up. Okay, but I think some of us might be able to relate to what Scarlett has gone through. So here's Scarlett. When my ex shared my text with other people, I was mortified, but my family and friends were so supportive. When I told them I was upset, they said my feelings were justified, but I didn't believe them. I thought I was just being anxious. I must have been overreacting. The more I thought about it, the more I believed I had just exaggerated the whole thing. And anyway, it was my fault for sending those messages in the first place. And then maybe on reflection, Scarlett begins to wonder if she's been gaslighting herself into thinking that her ex had done nothing wrong, that nothing bad had actually happened in this case. Now, Scarlett's case is different from Ingrid's in a lot of ways, but we're going to focus on one way in which they're different. In Ingrid's case, she is able to, and in fact does, identify specific other people as her gaslighters. In this case, I have designed it so that Scarlett is not identifying other people as her gaslighters. In fact, the people around her are supporting and affirming her. So that's different than Ingrid's experience. But she continues to doubt herself anyway, much in the same way that a target of gaslighting would doubt themselves. So if other people aren't gaslighting her, and she's still experiencing gaslighting kind of doubts, maybe this is a case where somebody has become their own gaslighter. Because nobody else is gaslighting her. Maybe it's her. Maybe she is the gaslighter. You know this, I still don't think so. And I'm going to go through this slide a little bit quickly because my argument is the same as it was in Ingrid's case. I don't think Scarlett meets any of these criteria for being a gaslighter. For the same reasons, I don't think Ingrid met any of these conditions. So for Scarlett to be her own gaslighter, she would have to be trying to get herself to doubt herself so much that she begins to feel like she's losing touch with reality. I do not think Scarlett is trying to get herself to feel that way. For the same reason, I don't think Ingrid was trying to do that. So I don't think she meets the aim of gaslighters. And again, the method of intentional manipulation, no, I don't think so. We would have to say she is intentionally manipulating, deceptively manipulating herself behind her own back into having false beliefs like I made it up because I'm anxious. I don't see her intentionally and deceptively manipulating herself, so I don't think that happens either. And then in the morality case, even if you want to say that Scarlett is doing something wrong by doubting herself, which a lot of us didn't want to say for Ingrid, but maybe we just don't like Scarlett, I don't know, she's not committing the same kind of moral wrong that a gaslighter commits. Because remember, lots of things in the world are wrong. That doesn't make them all gaslighting. So she doesn't do that. And then again, the power component, I don't even know. You would have to say Scarlett has power over Scarlett. And I don't know how that works. Again, you can help me in Q&A if you want, but that makes no sense to me. So Scarlett meets none of the conditions for being a gaslighter. She is not gaslighting herself. But she is still reporting the types of doubts that somebody reports when they have been gaslit. What could explain that? And y'all, we do still want to be able to explain and understand what's happening in these kinds of cases. So we do want a tool for this, but self-gaslighting isn't the tool, and gaslighting isn't the tool by stipulation because I designed the case that way. So what is going on in Scarlett's case? Well, Scarlett has a very supportive network of family and friends, and that is wonderful. But Scarlett also exists in the world. So she hears messages from other people who are not her friends and family. She hears messages from society. So what I want us to do now is imagine Scarlett's thoughts about herself and expand them so that they apply to women and not just to Scarlett as one woman. And I think we will find striking similarities. So when Scarlett says things like, I was just overreacting, I don't know if any of you have ever heard that women overreact, that women make things up when they report things that have harmed them. Scarlett exists in this world. Scarlett has heard that too. I think her beliefs like, I was just anxious, I was overreacting, I exaggerated, those also look to me like this belief that maybe you have heard that women are too emotional. I have heard those things, some of you are nodding, so I see that you have heard those things. Scarlett has heard those things, because again, she exists in this world. Now, feminist philosophers are going to encourage us to see those sorts of social messages as a mechanism of sexist oppression. And that makes me think that what's going on in Scarlett's case is something called internalized oppression, which we're now going to talk about. Okay. A brief definition. There's a massive literature on this, y'all, but here's a super one slide. Internalized oppression happens when somebody in a marginalized group takes negative social messages about people with their identity and then builds those social messages into their own beliefs about themselves. They build these negative beliefs into their self-conceptions. And what I've done is I've taken 3 leading feminist scholars and combined their accounts to get some sort of things that happen to us when we've internalized our oppression. And for the philosophers in the room, this is Sandra Lee Barkey, Ann Cudd, and Diana Myers. Those, yes, like a big 3. They're very good. Okay, so here are some things that happen to us when we've internalized our own oppression. All right, the first thing we do is we adopt negative social messages as our own. So hypothetically, let's say, if you hear women are too emotional enough times, part of you, even if it's just a little tiny part of you, will likely start to believe that too. So you adopt negative messages as your own. You then believe that there is a problem with you. Nobody says women are too emotional, hooray, right? That's a critique of women, okay? That's why it's so emotional and not just they experience emotions like human beings. So you can have this thing that happens that the problem is yours. I'm so emotional, why am I this way? Okay? Then you can experience a splitting or fragmentation of the self and the feeling that those fragments are at war with one another. That's Sandra Lee Barkey's language. And what she means by that is, look, part of you has internalized this message, I'm so emotional, what's wrong with me? You might feel inferior in some way because of that. But then there's this other part of you that's like, I'm not inferior, I feel emotions, and that's okay. So you've been split or fragmented. There are these 2 parts of you, okay? And they disagree with each other. They are clashing against one another in a way that will make you feel like you have turned against yourself. All right, why am I on about this? Because I think we can understand Scarlett's case as meeting the criteria for being a case of internalized oppression. And here's how we might do that. So first, the messages that Scarlett repeats about herself align with social messages about women as a group. She has adopted social messages as her own beliefs. I exaggerated, I'm just too anxious. Then, she struggles to recount her experience in a way that doesn't center herself as the source of the problem. I was too anxious. I shouldn't have sent those messages. She believes the problem is hers. We also can imagine that Scarlett feels split or fragmented because part of Scarlett surely understands that it is a totally rational response to feel upset when your messages are made public without your consent. She's a reasonable person. Part of her must know that. But then there's this other part of her that feels like, I just overreacted. Nothing bad actually happened to me. Why am I making this up? So that's the fragmentation or splitting of herself, and then those two parts are clashing in a way that makes Scarlett feel that she has been turned against herself. Y'all, that's internalized oppression. That is what I think is happening in Scarlett's case. So the tool for understanding her experience is not self-gaslighting. The tool to use here, I think, is internalized oppression. Okay. So what I've done so far is I've presented a descriptive, or you might say definitional, case for why we shouldn't understand our experiences or the experiences of others as being cases of self-gaslighting. Right? Neither Ingrid nor Scarlett has become their own gaslighter. But it's possible that I'm wrong. It happens. Or what's probably more likely is that some of you are sitting out there thinking like, okay, philosophy, this is great, but I for sure gaslight myself. Like, I know I gaslight myself. So if your definition doesn't allow for that, guess what? Change your definition. The definition is the problem. Okay. But I came prepared with other arguments, not based on definitions. These are normative or moral reasons. And I think I only have time to talk about the first one, so we can talk about the second one in Q&A, but I like the first one. That's the one I find most persuasive, so I'm going to talk about that one. Look, we coined the word gaslighting in the first place because it captured something about the world that we thought it was important for us to understand. It is important to understand the experiences of people who are in these sorts of like manipulative, controlling, abusive relationships of this specific kind. That's what the word lets us do. That's the power of the word. When we start talking about self-gaslighting, we risk diluting the power of the word gaslighting. And here's like an image, because I'm a visual person. Imagine putting a drop of food coloring into a glass of water. And then imagine putting a drop of food coloring into a bathtub of water. It is much easier to see the color in the cup than it is in the bathtub. When you start talking about things like self-gaslighting, you are putting the drop of color in the bathtub. Actually now, gaslighting is so much everywhere. I think we're in an ocean. Okay, we're in an ocean and you can't see the color anymore. What do I mean by that? I mean, we risk what is losing distinctive, distinctive and distinctively harmful about interpersonal gaslighting. Why is it so harmful? Why do we have this word in the first place? Because it's the intentional, goal-oriented manipulation of another person. That's why gaslighting is so bad. That's why we need the word. We risk losing sight of that if we apply gaslighting to too many cases where it doesn't naturally fit. Now that's not a definition-based reason not to use it. That's a moral reason not to use it. And we can talk about the second one later if you want. This is my last slide. Okay, so to sum up, here's what I've done. I've argued that at least in two paradigmatic cases of self-gaslighting, we can actually explain them using other tools. Today, the tools I looked at were just interpersonal gaslighting and internalized oppression. But look, you can go home and Google self-gaslighting, and you will continue to see people reporting to be their own gaslighters. And maybe you still feel like you are your own gaslighter. And maybe I still feel like I am my own gaslighter, and that's why I wrote this talk. I don't know. But I think it makes perfect sense that we feel like our own gaslighters when we look at these other concepts that are actually at play. Why do we feel like we're gaslighting ourselves? Because that's how gaslighting makes us feel. Why do we feel like we're gaslighting ourselves? Because that's what internalizing our oppression does to us. They make us doubt ourselves, they make us blame ourselves, they make us question our self-worth. That is what we're doing when we identify ourselves as our own gaslighters. We are doing those things. That's not on accident. It's because it's how those other concepts make us feel. So in response to the title of my talk, Can We Gaslight Ourselves?, I want to say no. But at the same time, I want to acknowledge that sometimes it is really super gonna feel like we can. That's it.
questions, and usually the way we go is I just look for hands to shoot up in the air, and then I'll sort of number people. If you're the kind of person that doesn't like to shoot your hand up in the air initially, that's fine, but we'll just see how we go. So, any takers, any hands? Okay, I see a couple over here. So let me start with you first, and then we'll go to Chris.
My question is, where do you think that, how do you think that gaslighting blew up so much? Like in 2020 being like the most popular, how do you think it got that big? That is.
Oh, so can you hear me if I'm not on the mic?
Yes.
Okay, I know I talk, when I get excited, I talk really loud. So the question was, how do I think that gaslighting became such a used, maybe overused word? How do I think it became so popular? I have actually never thought of that question. And so now I'm going to think about it. I wonder if it's because it is such, so this is off the top of my head. I wonder if it's because it is such a powerful word, like it does capture something that we do think is so important, that we have tried to use it in a number of different ways. So like it's so powerful that maybe people relate to it a lot, and maybe they want to like, not want to, nobody wants to think they can gaslit, but like they see themselves in the word, they can like relate to it, and I'm seeing some head nods, so I'm making a little bit of sense.
I put the words with feeling.
Yes, so we've all had, I think we have all had feelings similar to what's going on in gaslighting. The word has the power to capture our feelings, and that might make us use the word so much that the word has like exploded in popularity. I don't know, what do you think?
Probably is it, like, you know, you had your feelings and everything. It's like, you know, wait, this is a word that describes it.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that question. I never would have thought about that. It's fantastic.
All right, another question?
Hi.
It's very interesting because that actually says a lot into what I was going to say. I think a lot of kind of the damage that has been done to this and other words that are overused in our society in particular has happened a lot with our recent kind of like therapy boom almost. And people start using a lot of therapized language to describe things that are incorrect. Like people saying that OCD is being neat and tidy.
Yes.
And my question to that effect was going to be that if you believe that this is a more wrong, which I also agree with,
This being gaslighting?
this being referring to ourselves as self-gaslighting, referring to other people as self-gaslighting, in the sense that it reduces the effectiveness or meaning of that word for the people who actually experienced it,
Yeah.
that we could say a similar thing to these other words that are being misused, like, you know, I was abused today by the shuttle driver because he didn't show up on time. I have OCD because
Yes.
I like keeping my pens tidy. Like,
Yes. So some of you were laughing. I was literally just talking to a psychologist friend of mine about how this is happening with the word trigger. And yes, with the word trigger and PTSD. So hypothetically, I might have heard something like, my professor gave me PTSD because the exam was so hard. Not mine. So the OCD is also an excellent example. Like you wash your hands, so you have OCD. And yes, I think the therapizing of things. I think that's an excellent explanation. I got all excited and forgot your actual question.
I was just going to say, I was asking if you think that can be extended to those things. Like,
Yes.
is it morally wrong to reduce the value of these other words that aren't necessarily, you know, like abuse, trauma, those things are similar to or can be described in terms of gaslighting. But things like OCD, it's not something that, you know, is talking about a harmful experience that one person is experiencing with another person, but can that be kind of seen in the same light?
I do think so. And maybe we want to talk about this in like a matter of degree, and so maybe it's more harmful for some words rather than others. Although I have to say, like, if you have PTSD, that is like a lived experience that you go through every day of your life. And it is a serious thing. OCD is it is not washing your hands, okay? That is not what OCD is. You live with this I'm joking, I'm legitimate, like, I'm being for real right now. Like, no, you don't, because that's not what's happening. So, yes, I think it can apply to other words. I think it does apply to other words. And a lot of it is like therapy type words that we're seeing this happen with. Yeah, it's an excellent question, Chris.
I kind of want to connect to what she's saying. I think we definitely had like a boom in like mental health resources, which is obviously great, but
Yes.
we've tried to become like more, I don't want to use this word, but like woke about it. And like, we know, like, oh my God, we know we have mental health now. And like, okay guys, we all have brains now. We can recognize that we have mental health. But I feel like we're recognizing too much where it's become like, oh my God, I got PTSD from my math exam today, which is not true. And I think because we are more like open about talking about that stuff, it's become too common and not actually definitionally true.
Yes. So I should say, and maybe I should have said this earlier, like it is very important that mental health is becoming something that we talk about as a society. That is important and good. So I'm glad you brought that up because yes, that is fantastic. We should be doing that. We should be having conversations about this. But yeah, remind me of your question.
It wasn't a question, I just kind of connected.
Okay, good. So I didn't forget the question.
No, I just was kind of like adding on to that, like, because of this like new information that we have as well, it's become like overused and too common with these like PTSD and OCD and like anxiety and those things have been overused that they're not actually definitionally true to the situation.
And I guess we could see it as a type of empathy, like if we want to take a positive spin on it, it could be people expressing a kind of empathy. That's the best positive, that's the most positive spin I can take on it.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a question here. No.
So I know that you said like gaslighting, you can't unintentionally do it or be like, oops, you did it. But
Yeah.
could that actually happen, say if like someone's been gaslit and then the person that got gaslit gaslight someone else, but not because they actually want to do it, but because they picked up those behaviors from the person that they experienced it from. Would that be an example of unintentional, or would that still just be gaslighting?
I'm going to answer you as Kate Abramson. Who's fantastic, and I won't be able to do justice to her because she's fantastic. Yeah, she's fantastic. So she says, look, insofar as you are acting, insofar as you are doing a thing and not like having a muscle spasm, you are doing something intentionally. The question is what you're doing intentionally. And she says you don't have to have the goal. You don't have to be thinking in your mind, I'm going to gaslight you right now. Because otherwise there would be very few cases of gaslighting, because very few gaslighters will have the conscious goal, I'm going to do a gaslighting. But she does say it has to be intentional. She also says it doesn't have to be conscious. So it's intentional, but we can do it unconsciously, she says. And I have to admit to you that I've spent hours of my life trying to figure out how you can do something intentionally and not consciously. I don't. So she uses like being passive aggressive as an example. People are passive aggressive all the time. It is intentional, you are doing something intentionally, but you're not like, I'm going to be passive aggressive right now. That's not how passive aggression works. So in your specific example, I mean, I suppose it's the case that it's intentional but not conscious, is what it sounds like your case is. But maybe that's a case where it's a moral wrong that's less blameworthy? I don't know. Like, that seems plausible to me, because there are moral wrongs that are less blameworthy than other moral wrongs. And in this case, there might be, like, exculpatory evidence or something that would make us blame this person less, even though on someone like Abramson's account, they would still be gaslighting.
My question is, what if Scarlett was a man? Like, what
Yes, I thought about this too. Go ahead.
what if in my brain, I shouldn't be feeling this way, but in my heart, I do.
Good. So I have also spent hours of my life thinking about this question. So as a confession, I'm a feminist philosopher. Surprise. And the work on gaslighting lives in feminist philosophy. And so it's not by accident that there was like a feminist spin to today's talk. But that's not to say that gaslighting and internalized oppression are the only other concepts we can use to describe what's going on in these intrapersonal cases. So the person in question, maybe they're confident, but maybe they're having like a moment, like a lapse in their confidence or something, because they would still have to be repeating those self-doubty kinds of messages. Those can come from any number of places. It doesn't have to come from oppressive social messages. It could come from non-oppressive social messages. It could also just be like some people just have anxiety, and we can just call it anxiety. Like, is there that? Like, that can capture the experience. Why not just call it that? I don't know. Does that, have I answered your question? You weren't satisfied.
So it's not like internal oppression, it's just like being anxious about something.
Or you can internalize other social messages about your identity group without them being oppressive social messages. Like, here's an example. You said, what if Scarlett were a man? There is a social belief that men don't get to show emotions. Now, a feminist philosopher will likely say that's not oppressive, but it is harmful. So it's still the case that somebody could internalize that harmful belief about themselves and then do self-gaslighting types, like self-gaslighting looking behaviors, even though it's not an oppressive social message.
Okay, so we're in a position where I've seen 3 hands.
Oh, no.
We've got 1 minute. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna have all 3 people ask their question,
Oh, God, okay.
but like, try to make it short, and then we'll see if you maybe you pick one. Okay.
I'll sacrifice mine to vote.
Hey, no, it's okay. Go, go. Are you sure?
You can
Don't
ask me
gaslight
after.
yourself.
You're more time.
I'm kidding. Sorry.
She can answer.
You can. That's right, you can. Yes.
Well, mine's a complicated question.
Oh, yeah, oh
So
dear.
I'll try and make it like slim.
Okay.
I guess I was wondering to what extent is like this actually different categories? Like most of your, I would just say that the assumption in your case is that most of these are like heterosexual relationships, where it's like gender dynamics specifically. It's not always the case, obviously, but how people conceptually define relationships are often through or reflective of patriarchal values.
Heteronormative. Yeah, sure.
Heteronormative values. And that kind of plays into what someone else was saying about unconscious gaslighting, or to the extent like those concepts are being weaponized or reinforced internally by people, even as a means of fulfilling their social roles within patriarchy, specifically, like a man gaslighting a woman, like when you brought up the reflection of power or something like that, like that insecurity about power is obvious. I would say it has some sort of reflection in like your gender expression as a man being tied to this kind of toxic masculinity or something like that, or like a lot of, or the, I guess the ability to coerce someone, or like, or these messages being received by women still filtered through these internalized oppressive messaging, even if it is direct gaslighting.
Oh, sure.
So I guess.
No, that's okay.
Well,
I see. Do you have another thing to add with this? Yeah, I was gonna say, that was kind of, that opened a can of worms. So, why don't you go ahead and answer that question?
You had something else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was also going to add what she was saying about how men could experience like internalized oppression. But I was agreeing with what you were saying, where it's like it isn't necessarily oppression because they're not marginalized, but it is trying to grapple with the reflection of their identity as it is socially enforced onto them. Like the social messaging is them as men on how they would decide in the situation. Like if something occurs to them that could combat against what they're supposed to be feeling as a man or how they're supposed to be responding as a man, they could just like completely doubt their, like, I guess masculinity, or deny this like having an effect on them and try and like erase it. Like these it's not a very particular thing, because they're not,
I'm so
yeah.
sorry to stop you. We're over time.
You can stay.
You can stay, for sure. Do you have anything, you just want to make one statement or response to that, or?
Oh my gosh.
If not, then we can just get, I just didn't try to.
The only thing that I almost word vomited out is that I should have specified that, like I'm thinking of feminist philosopher Meryl Fry, who says that men can't be oppressed as men. It is not the case that no men are oppressed, and it is very important. So like, you can be oppressed as gay, you can be oppressed as trans, right? So, that's the only thing that almost just, I almost blurted out.